Hey folks, Steve here with another Korea Fire and Ice video. We will be looking at turn 10, maybe more, depending on how swiftly we move and how much I talk about things that are not just what is happening on the board. If you watched the last video, we managed to get through a number of turns, mostly because I was just handling everything off camera. And what's really interesting is just how much not meeting a timetable early has shifted the game momentum. Because, I mean, it's not even to the historical time frame of the Incheon invasion, and the Allies have already broken out of the Pusan perimeter that never was quite the Pusan perimeter, and we're pushing back the North Koreans in a pretty gnarly way. A lot of this has to do with the fact that once you gain some small tactical number superiority, it becomes much easier because the unit, counter density is so low that you can kind of very quickly come up on top of a unit like this poor guy. Like, we're probably going to be able to come over here and surround him and annihilate him pretty quickly. That's sort of the reality. Like, we are just going to get up there, and he's a speed bump, and it's almost like a death spiral because we keep eliminating more units. There's less units to screen a line, and so it's easier now for the UN swarms to come up and eliminate more units. Now, the great sort of remedy to this is going to be Chinese intervention, but we're still a little ways from that to begin with. So right now, it's survive as long as possible, or else the communists are going to disintegrate. Now, in terms of the objective markers, what we've now started to see, now that there's actually a clear front line that's progressing, is that the UN player is placing objective markers and revealing them as they go, with the idea that they can pull those off the map to get victory points kind of whenever. And as long as they're able to get situated the right way, they can peel off victory points and get plenty of victory points. Right now, the victory point track has never been very far beyond 5 or 6 in the communist favor, which has allowed more and more support to go to the UN forces. And, I'm not sure where the tipping scale comes in, but like, we can start picking these blue objective markers off the map at some point, and we can keep doing so, continually, to the point where we push the game very much in the UN's favor in terms of actual victory points on the board for the actual victory. So it's like things are going very well for the UN, not in victory points, but operationally, and they'll be able to start triggering a cash out of victory points at some point in the future. Now, the one funny thing is, I am once again trying to decide, do I not take every hex of Seoul as the UN and leave one hex uncaptured to bank more victory points in? I mean, we were starting to put some UN objective markers in Pyongyang. The communists are now forced to try to remove some of those, but it might simply be easier just to put them in do what the communists did and bank some points in Seoul, or we just continue to put them, here and there across the map. I'm really not sure what the better path there is. There's certainly the potential for the UN forces to do very similar things that the communists have tried, which is use Seoul as a objective bank. And again, I've said this so many times in the series, game certainly seems like it's okay to do that there's not really anything keeping me from doing that. And in terms of optimal versus suboptimal, I mean, it feels relatively optimal, more probably for the UN than the communists, right? Because we took Seoul, okay, we could start leveraging it. But once the UN takes Seoul, it's going to be a while before the communists can take Seoul back. So it's probably easier for the UN to bank and get victory points in a communist-controlled Seoul area than the communists, probably, over time. And it really calls into question, like, in some ways, it's almost more beneficial to never actually take a capital if your opponent has captured it, but instead besiege it, go around it, put objective markers in it, keep a guy nearby to flip them open, and then assuming there are no enemy units in Seoul or whatever, to just start getting those victory points. I don't know. I don't know. Because the same thing's going to happen here. We're going to wrap around Seoul. Let's say we keep one communist unit in there to try to hold them up. Well, okay, they'll still uh, be able to place objective markers there. They won't be able to claim them because there's a communist unit there, but eventually they just pull the trigger, eliminate that unit, and then start getting objective points. So I don't know. The whole objective minigame still, to me, very hard to square with the rest of the game, which I will say the rest of the game is functioning quite well. I'm enjoying all the aspects of the game in terms of the actual operations, even if it feels awfully sad for the communists right now because they are just getting walloped, just walloped. More worse than history, I think. Worse than history right now. And I'm not sure, like, even if I had done better and gotten down here sooner, would that have even made much of a difference? Because I just think it's coming down to like the communist support levels were never that high. The UN support levels are very high, and that advantage is just so good. It makes it really hard to figure out like when and where the communists can even succeed and win a battle and force the UN to suffer something. And it really does seem to work this way, where like once you start winning, you're likely to not stop winning combats because your enemy support levels will drop because they have to retreat or whatever. You can try to stave that off, but eventually you will disrupt them, you will rout them, and they will lose support levels if they use tank or artillery support. And if they're not using it, then that's just as good because you're going to use yours and still win. And just, you're just going to be that cut above the whole time. Now, that probably helps feed into the Korean War, narrative which you have to retreat and you're going to advance and then you're going to retreat and then you're going to fight and end up right over here as my camera freaks out trying to focus on my hand. So all of that kind of needs to happen for the Korean War to feel historical or to be able to simulate the historical narrative. But whoa, it just when you're rolling dice and it's almost like you don't even need to roll the dice. Like it's almost not even worth bothering because you're going to get the maximum combat spread for losses. It's just kind of interesting. And maybe better play on my part as the communist would make this a little bit tougher. Maybe I'm just not playing very well. I think what's tricky is like you can get up tier very quickly. You can then potentially get, spend a couple more movement points and just get to here, get a unit up to here, and then all of a sudden this guy's doomed. He's just doomed. And it's like there's just no way to save the situation other than to try to figure out a way to just get the Chinese in as soon as possible. Now, I've taken some shots at Chinese air bases, which means that it is possible for the Chinese to intervene, but you can still only get Chinese intervention if the UN has positive victory points, which is not the case. And the UN has been careful not to push so hard that they're getting tons of victory points all at once to trigger that kind of thing for happening. So I guess that's one way to like, it's the strategy beyond strategy, the wheel within wheel, wheels within wheels of winning the war the right way so that you can get a more certain victory, I guess. But it doesn't necessarily feel like that's what I'm doing, but I don't know. But anyway, so we're going to get started here. I've already done a lot of the September monthly turn stuff so that I could talk and blab for 10 minutes without showing you gameplay. So I rolled weather. It is clear weather again, good for the allies. I took care of all the other good monthly stuff. So we did foreign aid, which meant that yes, the UN got more good stuff, and the communists got an extra victory point for it, but that's not a big deal. Infrastructure supply phase basically resulted in the communists not having a whole lot of supply. They didn't have much to begin with, and then they spent a bunch getting their HQ back up, And we actually have, or we're going to try something new. We've spent some supply to put some of these prepared position markers in Seoul and over here, with the idea that those are good terrain support things that will maybe slow down the allies, the UN, with all their support levels. So I put, again, a few in Seoul and one over here on this coastline. I will say they're awfully expensive, and we've spent a ton of supply for the communists doing it. So maybe it'll turn out to be a bad decision. I don't know. We're going to try it out. Aircraft recovery. The communists actually were able to repair their ground support plane, and they have reallocated it to ground support for air commitment. The Allies sent out all their planes. The Allies did spend some supply improving the one normal airbase in South Korea to an improved one, so they can basically fly whatever they want without it being long range. I did already do infrastructure bombing. The Allies scored 2 hits, and then they had a miss. So they had allocated 3 B-29s to infrastructure bombing, and that's what they got. They had an airfield that they failed on, so they did not hit a Chinese airfield, and so much for that. And then we have 3 planes doing top cover to shoot down that communist ground support, 3 planes doing ground support themselves, which will be quite powerful, and 3 planes doing interdiction because we want to pin these communists down so they can be eliminated and they can't do a whole lot, and that will enable us to have further gains as we go. So, and that would be it for the monthly phase. So very easy stuff there. Getting into week 1 of the September turn, there was not a change in the fleet deployment. They're staying on the east side, the Sea of Japan for now. We're going to change that next turn, and you'll understand why before long. There's no amphibious invasion phase this turn. There's no sea evacuation. The reinforcements, there actually weren't a whole lot. There was a couple of minor adjustments on the aids, and the communists did spend a replacement point to rebuild a unit, just doing what they can to try to put something in the field. And then the UN communications and refresh phase have taken place. So we are really good to go to start with the communist strategic movement and activation phase for this turn. I may blow through all 4 turns of this month in one video, just so that we're moving, because I'm working at a pretty fast pace and we're getting through the game. And you guys, I think, kind of understand the way the game works. So how much value it is to see each and every counter move, probably not a whole lot. But you guys will see things as they progress, and I'll bring us back on camera after we've completed some significant activities, and we'll see where things stand. I will say that this turn for the communists will be short. They only have right now 3 supply points. That's not much to do anything. They're going to get ripped apart, and that's just going to be the reality of it. We probably will slow things down to show the amphibious invasion, but that'll be about it. So, okay, see you guys here in a second. Okay, here we are on turn 10 after all of the communist activities. So we pulled the HQs behind the border where they will be able to refresh for cheaper later. We sort of tried to set up defenses along the road junctions, and even got a guy back into Incheon, hoping that we can hold the line somehow, some way, at least through the next turn, because that naval invasion is going to happen here very soon. We would have refreshed these HQs, but each time they were interdicted by the US. One of the interdicting planes had to go back to the available, the other stayed on station. But that's going to nullify those HQs' ability to refresh for the rest of the month, I believe, which puts the communist player in a pickle, because their only HQ is the one right here in the center, which will be able to activate units, but really won't be able to do much. So we're hobbled over this whole next month as the UN continues to trash uh, the communist forces. So um, I guess we'll go ahead and move things into the uh, allied side of the turn. You can imagine that there's going to be some logistical challenges because we have to get our one UNHQ in a good position to keep all the cadres activated. Um, but I'd say so far we're doing pretty good. Um, we're doing pretty good. So okay, guys, I will see you here in a second. What I'll probably have done is all the UN strategic movement, and then we'll see where the actual activations are going to go. It'll be interesting to see that. All right. Okay, so here is the situation at the end of the UN strategic movement. Um, I know Stigler was watching. I don't know. I hope you still are, Stigler, about not needing my tweezers. Well, I did find a good use for them, which is marking the northernmost hex row so that I remind myself not to advance beyond that, because by rule you can't strat move beyond wherever your most northernmost unit is. So to help make sure that I didn't accidentally do that, I was able to just lay my tweezers along the hex row, so that was helpful. So we're not using it to move units, but it serves a purpose. Um, you can see we kind of have things kind of well situated where we've got this cadre group on the far right. That's the coastal, action group, I guess. Our 24th Infantry is situated here in the center. We've sort of co-located the South Korean units so that this HQ can keep them operating. And then we have our Commonwealth brigade, who's operating over there. I'm not sure where else to put them, but is useful to probably just help capture some territory when we activate. I'm not sure I'll even activate that unit this turn because we may have a bottleneck of activations. And I don't want to be spending my supply too dramatically as we get going, because we want to make sure that amphibious assault can happen and we can exploit whatever happens there. And then two different cadre sets over here, the first cav and the second infantry, which are principally going to be the units that will take Seoul and Incheon or whatever, depending on how you want to look at it. Is a little bit of a traffic jam, and I kind of need to resolve that a little bit. So now this is done, I can move this guy out of the way. We want these guys pushing north. We want these guys to probably move up this way. The South Korean units can kind of just head straight northward, and then just depending on how things end up panning out, we're going to have the invasion force come in over here, but then these guys can kind of come up and wrap around Seoul is probably how they'll end up operating eventually. But as you can see, all the roads lead to the capital, so we kind of have to come out around and secure supply lines. It's its own little puzzle there, as the roads conjoin into one place. So that is, its own little puzzle to operate on. The primary UNHQ is still situated in the center, not far behind the front lines, and can basically count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. Sorry, we're a little off camera there. 7.5 movement to activate this guy, so he's good. And then the rest of these guys are all pretty well situated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the only guys we really got to worry about is probably after this turn, this UNHQ is probably going to have to move up over here just so we stay in enough range to be activating these guys over here. Or we get additional HQs as reinforcements. That will eventually happen, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, so this is all before the actual activation. I did want to show kind of the way things are shaping out. Definitely have a more sophisticated command structure on the UN side here with the cadre rules and the ability to activate those cadres and further activate more units. We are at the point now where, this HQ can spend its 4 activations activating 4 cadres, And then this HQ can activate these units separately, and we'll be able to activate pretty much everything, pretty easily, and take various actions. The one thing we have to keep in mind is we've got basically 6 turns of action before winter sets in which case the UN player is going to have some penalties to supply expenditure and stuff like that, and that is going to slow them down. So they kind of need to make the most of the next 6 turns. But yeah, so we'll come back after their activation phase and kind of see where things sit and go through the end of turn 10, and we'll jump into turn 11 thereafter. Okay, here we are at the end of turn 10, effectively. The UN did move forward, and we did not advance our HQs, but we did come into battle lines. We did force the prepared position of this unit. We pushed the unit back, so we removed the defensive position, or prepared positions, whatever you want to call it. It was helpful. It did dramatically reduce how much support the UN could bring to bear, but it just ended up still being too much for the communists to handle, and they edged it out by just a couple of points, which meant that basically I had to retreat and suck up some VP losses. We had some meeting engagements over here that didn't get very far, and the communists, because it was a meeting engagement, there wasn't as much support that could be put in, and I pulled some crappy chits, which only allowed us to roll a d6 instead of a d10, which meant that really those communist units could stay in place, and we burned off a couple of victory points. Over here, the UN forces did eliminate another communist unit and have sort of blown open a gap there, though the terrain and road network is such that it's going to be hard for them to easily exploit that, but they have some pretty good opportunities here. And even Seoul is almost surrounded by Zox, so it's going to be a tough situation either way. We also eliminated a unit over here on the west side of the city of Seoul, so we're just sort of about to enter the city proper, and the communist unit in Incheon is basically out of supply, or out of communication, and is going to get walloped with the invasion, which will be coming here in the next action. Now, we could alternatively try to navally invade over here. I don't know that that's really better, because what we want to have is this nice open space for all these units to come springing forward and running up the roads behind these guys. This would only be a local cutoff, and I don't think that's good enough. I don't know. I think either way, it's really tough for the communists right now, right? In terms of the objective marker stuff, the UN did put an objective marker in Seoul right here, and the communists removed a UN objective marker in Pyongyang where they have a unit sitting. So yeah, it's about now I can start to see where the objective marker system kind of flattens out into something coherent. I think a lot of my verbiage on the topic is still valid, but it certainly, once you have an actual front line defined, it does make a little bit more sense as to where you're going to go. But, if the UN had simply overrun Seoul and taken it, then we wouldn't get to place objective markers and get objective points for it. Then we'd instead be trying to look over here. And maybe that's fine, but, I don't know. I'm probably nitpicking on something that doesn't need as much nitpicking, but because it's so important, I can't help but talk about it. It's not just this operational game. It is really intrinsically involved in all the other mechanics. Case in point, the victory point marker is at 0 right now because the communists have tried to shave off the VPs instead of replacement points, of which they are out of, and avoiding retreating, which will further cause problems for the units as we have them. So I think with all of that in mind, they're doing the best they can to hold on, but for sure they want to give up victory points where they can, because once we get it onto the blue side, that will at least provide some foreign intervention capability for the communists, which they really need. They need China in. but then that makes it easier for Ridgeway to come on. So I don't know. It's like no good deed goes unpunished. Whatever good you try to do is balanced by some bad, I guess, no matter what you're doing. So there we go. We're going to go ahead and move into turn 2, or week 2 of this month, which would be turn 11 for the overall game. This is going to be the turn where we have our amphibious landing capability, which we will probably target at Incheon, like I said, just to seal the deal around there and prepare the action for other stuff, which means we're going to move the 7th Fleet over. I keep thinking it's like I could invade here. Maybe I can do a dual invasion. Maybe I can invade in 2 different places, but we can only do 1 invasion per game. So does having it go in 2 different boxes count as 2 amphibious invasions, or is it 1 act as an amphibious invasion? I will try to figure that out before I'm recording again. So stand by, and we'll come back and start turn 11. Okay, so apparently I didn't quite have it right. We do this turn, so I've started turn 11, and the amphibious invasion happens before reinforcements. We actually have gotten the reinforcements, but we couldn't do an invasion yet. So it'll be next turn, week 3, turn 12, that we'll be able to do a naval amphibious invasion, amphibious assault invasion, whatever. And I can't do 2 different sides or 2 different areas because, or at least, in this case, I can't, because you have to pick the invasion box where you have your 7th Fleet, and the 7th Fleet can only be in one station box or the other. So for now, this turn, we're going to leave the fleet here on the east side just to help this, because they're going to start to lag behind before long. Get that situated, and then next turn, we move the fleet first, then we have our invasion, and then all the fun stuff goes on. So far, so good on terms of the Allied air, the UN air. They've not even bothered to use air support right now, because so far all the tank and artillery support has been enough, or bombardment support has been enough, that they haven't need to use it. And that just is starting to get into the, like, we have so many bonuses it doesn't even matter, but the air is there if we feel like we need it. If it's a tough spot and we want that overkill, we can do it, but I'm trying to hold it out long enough over the course of the month so that we're not running on empty air by the end. But again, they haven't really needed it. In terms of the reinforcements, there actually are reinforcements, and what I did is I put them in the sea transport box. So we're going to have 2 different cadre groups, the 1st Marine Division and the 7th Infantry Division, and then the 10th Corps UN HQ enters. So they're in the sea transport box. That's where I put them during reinforcements. So if for some weird reason I want to change where I invade and make it not Incheon and make it over here, I can do that. The invasion allows you to move the units from a sea transport box to the invasion box and then do the invasion. So it's really not an issue for us there. Yeah, so there you go. So I wanted to talk about that since it seemed relatively important to talk through. The communists are out of replacement points, so they can't reinforce and bring any units on, and they don't get any reinforcements this turn. They will get some stuff at the end of the month, but we're not there yet. So we're going to get into the... I'm going to do the Allied refresh, which is just going to amount to flipping a lot of these guys over. And then I'll do the communist activities, and boy, it's going to be tough figuring out what can we even do at this point. The reality is not much, and we'll likely see a lot of these North Korean units get eliminated. And what's going to be tough is, if they're eliminated, we're going to have a whole lot of a harder time getting objective markers placed, I guess. So it's almost like, in some ways, you don't want the UN to eliminate all the units of the enemy, because then it'll be harder to place objective markers. See, I can't stop talking about objective markers. I just can't do it. It matters so much. It feels like it matters. So there you go. Okay, let me take care of that, and we'll be back. Okay, here we are after the communist activity and refresh. Basically, just pulling back in a couple of places. I would have wanted to refresh an HQ, but the Allies successfully interdicted that refresh, and so things are pretty gnarly and bad for the communists. We're trying to hold something together over here, trying to pull back. That's a fallback point back there. Um, I can't really do much with these guys. I would rather have them be a nuisance and slow the Allies down in Seoul, kind of like what happened to the communists. So try to learn a thing or two. And there's no point. I might as well leave a guy here in Incheon just to be a speed bump. Um, and he might not even get to be a speed bump, depending on the shore bombardment part of the invasion, which we'll cover here shortly. So there's just not a whole lot for us to do, honestly. It's like pull back, hope for the best. We're relatively low on supply. There's not much we can do. We don't have any replacements. I mean, we're just at the mercy of the Allies. And because there's no like UN special automatic victory, like it kind of doesn't matter that the communists are falling apart here, because there's no way to just be like, okay, UN capture these areas, game over, right? That there's no condition for that, and probably rightly so, but we still are pretty far away from Chinese intervention just yet. So many turns away from that. So we could see like all of the communist forces are wiped off the map, and then what happens, right? I don't know. I don't know. If the Allies never advance into Seoul, they can keep placing objective markers. Advancing after combat is not required. So if they surround Seoul, eliminate the communist units, and just plot objective markers down, that's legally something they can do. They never take Seoul. They just place objective markers in. They have supply via these other, roads. Um, it's really no problem for them at all. They could just do that and get it set up so that they just continually pick up victory point after victory point until they're sitting pretty. And I guess you could see that or interpret that as like the reward for doing well is that they can get all those victory points. If this was any other game, they'd probably be getting victory points anyway. So I don't have a copy of it, but I believe that the old Korean War game from Victory Games, which is being reprinted by Compass Games, works on a victory point per turn model where the UN player accrues victory points based on what cities they control per turn. So they're incentivized to take stuff back and to do so quickly, because the longer they have control of cities, and really to defend well too, is for what they can hold and what they control over time, they get more victory points. That is judged at the end to see what kind of who won and by how much. So in this case, like, yeah, sure, taking Seoul is going to be important, and you get victory points for that in that game. Here, we're going to not occupy all of it, but still use it as a way to get victory points. That is odd. That is odd. There's probably ways to modify the rules to say that you if you're going to place an objective marker in a controlled hex of Seoul, there has to be an enemy unit nearby, right? Um, I don't know. It's just so odd. There's so many weird conditions, and I could understand maybe that's the reason why you're not allowed to place objective markers in cities without a unit in them, because you could just neglect to take it and siphon those points. But you could probably add some verbiage that would control that case, right? You can place an objective marker in a controlled city, but only if that controlled city is north of your most northern unit or whatever, right? We already have that condition for strategic movement. You could apply the same logic and say you can only place objective markers on enemy cities, whether or not they're occupied by the enemy, but they have to be north of your northernmost unit, which requires you to then continue to advance and continue to advance. Now, what happens if you're at the Chinese border with the whole UN army? Well, maybe you ought to get victory points for something else. I don't know. So stuff I'm thinking through for that. But anyway, enough lollygagging. We're going to flip it over to the UN side. So the UN's going to do its strategic movement. I believe our most northern hex is basically here, so we can't go above my tweezers. And they'll do their strat move, and then they'll do their operational move, which will probably be focused on taking this guy out, working our way up through here, and getting all kinds of situated that way. So, okay, we'll see what happens after that. Okay, here we are after the Allied activity. They have taken one of the hexes of Seoul, so the communists only have one left. They've eliminated and pushed back units, so they're coming up the coast road. They've liberated a UN supply source hex, so supply is not going to be any issue. So the only one under communist control is Incheon, which we've kind of left there because we're going to get the invasion anyway. And you can see we're sort of creeping up here, and have sort of opened up some of the supply lanes around Seoul a little bit. The real question will be, are we going to bother taking that last hex if we eliminate that unit or no? Do we bank or do we not bank? So that's sort of the end of that turn. And in terms of the objective markers, the Allies have chosen to reveal the objective that they placed in Seoul, which is worth 3 victory points. So altogether, there are 9 victory points for the UN on the board that they'll likely be able to start picking off when they choose. That would get them sort of like almost halfway to victory based on that, which is a nice banking for them to have in their piggy bank, so to speak. The communists didn't have any more that they could remove, so they had to place something. And what they ended up doing is placing one, where did I put it? Right here. They're unlikely to take that hex. So this is more about just placing something to have something. And I can start to see now where the VP minigame starts to constrain itself a little bit. So in some ways, I'm like, I've been complaining about the objective system. I can start to see where it balances out, but I think there are some goofiness bits to it that make it confusing. And I'll still have some recommendations or proposals probably by the end of this once I've had a good feel for it. But you can start to see now that there's actually stuff and places to put it. It makes a lot more sense as to, like, well, where are you going to put it? Where are you going to put it anyway? Rather than the weird logic of plopping stuff in areas that you didn't bother to take. So I don't know. There's some oddity there. I think I've worked out some logic verbiage that could help streamline the objectives and make a little more sense for people. Okay, so that is it for this turn. So we're going to go into right away week 3 of September 1950. We're going to move the what do you call it? The 7th Fleet to the Yellow Sea box over here. That will enable us to do a naval invasion, and we will conduct the amphibious invasion phase. So let me put a pause here and just make sure I do this in the right order. But we will take care of that. We'll likely see Incheon fall, and as you can imagine, things are looking mighty grim across the board for the communists. Okay, so let's talk about this naval invasion, amphibious invasion. So the way the rules work is that we have 8 amphibious points on our support track. That means 8 units can invade with 1 HQ for free. Well, it just so happens that the reinforcement schedule is such that we get 8 units, right? 2 cadre units and their 3 cadre subunits. That's 8, and then the 10th Corps HQ is the free HQ. It just happens to be, it's just that easy. And what's weird, it's going to seem like, as I look at the rules, like, boy, there's a lot of rules here for what could have been simplified, because all of this stuff is just so straightforward. It's like, okay, here are the units, that's what's going to invade. I mean, I guess you could have tried to pull more off to have other units invade, but I haven't had a reason to do that. Then we're going to do some naval bombardment against communist units within 2 hexes of the adjacent port hex. We would roll a d10 and compare it to the bombardment level. If it is equal to or less than the bombardment level, those units go to the replacements block. Well, here's the funny thing. Allied bombardment level is at 10. That has to do with the reinforcements that have come on. Maybe we had some foreign aid pump that up a little bit, but it's almost guaranteed. In this case, it is absolutely guaranteed, but it's almost guaranteed that this is going to work on units that are within that hex. So just straight up, I have 10 support. I don't even need to roll a die. This guy's toast. Boom. He gets shelled into oblivion. Right? That's it. That guy's just gone. That dude's just gone. And then HQs and units may activate normally to move from the invasion box to the connected land hex. Costs 1 MP if the hex is free of enemy units, so that'll be easy. Okay, so it sounds like these guys can just like enter the map and move normally, right? That's what it seems like we can just do. Now, what's a little bit odd is I think this HQ, like, I don't know, this is kind of weird. Like, it's straightforward to get up to this point, and then it's weird. HQ's units may activate normally to move from the invasion box to the connected land hex. If there's an enemy unit, we'll have to fight its way out. So what isn't clear to me is, like, do I do this now or do I do this later? Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those oddities. Very strange. It isn't totally clear to me how this is supposed to work. If I'm supposed to do this now, and let's say that I do, this would mean they would get to refresh before the communists get to go next, which makes sense, I guess. It's a surprise thing. Oh, now's a good time to point out that we are putting everybody on their spent side because this is a surprise turn. Because this is the turn that we're doing. This is the turn that we're doing the naval invasion. So this would be the surprise. That is actually probably the more valuable part of this. But it isn't clear to me how we move these guys onto the board. Enemies do not have Zocs for the remainder of the turn. Blah, 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 blah. May draw 3 combat chits. Add 1 MP to all bonus and exploitation movement. Gosh, this is a good turn. We're going to just eliminate stuff like freaking crazy here, guys. But I'm not sure how to do this. They may activate normally. Okay, well, then how would we do this? I guess we would activate the HQ. We're going to activate these guys, and we're going to have them move. They'll be flipped and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be as far as they could get if they move normally, and we would still have 1 stack per hex, so it would be like this. There's 1. And our problem is we've got a congestion problem. So some of these guys are going to have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we will move this HQ up like so. So there you go. The invasion has occurred, I guess. That if that's the intention, then all of these guys would filter in that way. I guess it's a traffic jam, so we've got to kind of get. I guess you guys are flipped. Well, they'll unflip with the refresh phase. I guess it doesn't matter, but they all come on like that. I guess is how that's supposed to work. Big invasion. They spread out now. If there was, if all of these other UN forces had been down at the Pusan perimeter, you could imagine these guys coming off the beach and activating during this phase would surround Seoul or something very quickly, or who knows what, if they're allowed to activate here. If the communists were allowed to activate beforehand, well, I guess they're all flipped, so they wouldn't be able to respond anyway. So it almost, in some ways, it doesn't necessarily matter when these guys get to activate and come on, other than by virtue of this happening during the invasion phase, they will get to flip back up before the communists go, and then they'll effectively get an extra movement this turn. So I could see where you wouldn't want that to happen. So maybe this is a question for for our game. It doesn't really matter because it's already an overwhelming success for the Allies or the UN. But I'll ask Adam about it on Consum World, and maybe we'll have an answer for that. So, okay, so those guys come on. I'm going to go do the refresh, and then we might be able to skip just to the UN stuff. Let me double check here if we have the UN. Okay, we're going to have a reinforcement phase, but then assuming there's nothing else, the UN will do their refresh phase, communist movement, but the communists can't move. Everything they own is flipped, including all their HQs. So this would go right to the communist refresh phase, which I'll have to see if they refresh during surprise. But then the UN's going to go. So I think I'm going to take myself off camera. We're just going to do the whole turn, I guess, and we'll figure out where we stand from that point. I'll have to see if the Koreans can, or the communists, North Koreans, the communists can refresh themselves at all. Possibly not. Okay, here we are after the UN activations. So basically, we eliminated most other communist units on the board. In fact, there are 2 communist combat units on the board. One who was able to retreat after a prepared attack, and he is currently. I forgot to put a routed marker on him. He is currently routed. And that situation's pretty rough. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to have these guys not advance after combat. I think we're going to leave them right there, south of the border. Because that lessens the chance of Chinese intervention. And you'll see why shortly. We also eliminated the last enemy in Seoul, but we didn't take the last. We didn't take the last hex. We didn't advance into it, and so then we placed an objective marker in that last hex of Seoul because it's our objective bank now, baby. And I used supply to refresh the HQ, but I ended up not activating these guys a second time because I wanted to activate the units that I did so that I could continue to crush those guys. And now what? Well, we're pushing up against the border. The North Koreans have been pushed out and eliminated. What if the UN just didn't take that last hex in Seoul and just kept racking up objective points while the North Koreans have nothing to provide? What do you think about that? Do you think that would work? Do you think that would work? Now, our issue is that delays, um, that sort of delays things quite a bit, and allows, if the communists come in, to come all the way down here and start much further along, which means we're not playing for time, but um, we kind of can operate at our leisure a little bit. We can hold here and just try to accrue some victory points from our sole objective bank. Do you think that would work? Do you think that might work? I think we're going to try it, and we're going to see what happens. So yeah, we are done with this turn at the moment. So yeah, the Allies, the UN placed an objective marker in Seoul. The Communists placed one in the port over here, just because they have to place one somewhere. Or oh no, I guess no, they couldn't have put it there. They would have had to have placed it in Seoul, I guess. So yeah, that's what they did. They're not going to get very far. So a lot of, it's like the communist has to place markers somewhere if they can, or remove them, and they can't really remove anymore, so they got to place them somewhere. That seems to be the best place to do it. My recommended verbiage, by the way, for this, to address this, is you can only place an objective marker south of the most northern unit, so as the communist, and then the reverse would be true for the UN. So the UN could only place what was the verbiage I came up with? If you're the UN player, this is my proposed verbiage to kind of help with some of this stuff. The objective must be placed north of the most southern communist unit. That I think would solve this whole problem with Seoul and the other capital. You cannot place an objective marker unless it is north of the most southern communist unit, which means we'd have to place an objective marker somewhere up here. We'd have to go get it, right? And the reverse would be true. The communists could not have placed objectives in Seoul that they just neglected to take. What they would have to do is place an objective marker south of the most northern unit. I think that would address some of this gaminess I'm dealing with Seoul. I think that would. So that'll be part of my proposed stuff. But okay, so the turn's done, and I think we'll go ahead and fit in week 4 very quickly. It's going to be a really fast turn. And I'll just tell you right now, the fleet is going to change positions back to the east. The reinforcements are going to be really straightforward. And it's kind of an oddball for the communists because they get, what is it? I like looking at the bits here. They would get 2 Chinese replacement points. They can't use them, I don't think. They do get them. So put that on the reinforcement track for the communists. Not going to help them. Then let's see. Can we spend those to replace North Korean units? I don't think so. I think it has to be. Yeah, it would have to be for Chinese units, so it doesn't help the North Koreans at all. Communications phase, or yeah, reinforcement phase, and then communications. We got our refresh, so all these guys get to be refreshed. I don't think there's that many to do. I think I forgot to refresh somebody, but that's fine. Yeah, so there you go. The UN forces are all refreshed. They're good to go. Um, I guess one thought that might is worth examining is, should I play with my own proposed rule? Would that make things better? Maybe, but I'm going to play the game as is, and that'll feed into my decision making on, is that a really good proposal or not. I could try to play test my proposal, but um, I don't know. I'll keep thinking on it, but I don't think I'm going to play that way because I want to see how else the game kind of hashes out with the rules as written in 3.0 version of the rules. Okay, so communists would get to go. What did the communists want to do? Probably not a whole lot of anything, to be honest. I think they pull back a little bit and hope for the best and hope that uh, they don't get curb stomped any more than they've already gotten curb stomped. um, and then with the allied activations, what do we want to do? Let me take myself off camera and we'll quickly take care of that. Okay, here we are at the end of week 4 before we close out this video, and you can see I've now positioned the various cadres and other units in a position due to strategic movement and everything else that allows us to basically sit on the border of, actually, come to think of it, I probably would have moved these guys up a little bit, like so, and have activated this HQ one more time to get to the front line. But there you go. Like right now, if I see, I probably want to do this a little bit. Yeah. Now we're talking. Okay, so this would be where we're at the end of turn. We do not want to cross into North Korea because that's going to exacerbate the Chinese intervention. Now there is a bonus to Chinese intervention because we attempted to bomb a Chinese airfield way earlier in the game. So there is still a chance that the Chinese intervention will occur. But right now, I don't necessarily need to do that. And I did not take that city or that last hex in Seoul, so the UN is plopping more objective markers there, and the communist player is having to put theirs in an allied area of Seoul. But otherwise, there's just 2 communist units on the board, no replacements. Everything else is pretty rough overall, and I mean, we have the potential to rack up a lot of victory points, right? Like there's already what, 9 grabbable, and then maybe another few there, so that puts us in a pretty good position victory point wise. Like we could coast to a pretty easy victory maybe, depending on what else happens here in the next few turns. So now I'll say that's an ahistorical choice I'm making here, right? The UN forces, MacArthur, I think at the time, was like, no, we're pushing, we're going to reunite the peninsula, we're going to reunite the country, and we're going to push into North Korea. But here, because I think I'm exploiting the victory point system a little bit, I'm going to say, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to liberate South Korea, and we're going to win on victory points, and let's not exacerbate the Chinese situation. Let's not exacerbate the Soviet Union situation, and let's just hold at the border. Let's just see what happens if we try to do that. I don't know for certain it's a good idea, but let's see how many victory points we can get for doing it, because if we can do it fast enough, we'll be in good shape. I don't know. If I change my mind, the good news is next turn we just surge across the border and we snatch up whatever we want to snatch up. I mean, we could have gotten pretty far already. In fact, we probably could have figured out a way to get up to Pyongyang, but if we did that, we wouldn't get victory points for it. We would just have captured Pyongyang for nothing, basically. Why do that? That seems silly, right? Why bother if it's not worth victory points? So we've got our little victory point bucket here. Let's just draw from that well, right? I don't know. It's kind of weird. Still weird, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe there's a great weakness to this, and it could be simply that the Chinese are going to join in and have some fun, and they're going to be able to come right up to the border already and attempt to make something happen. But our strength on the border is going to be so good, probably, that I mean, we could start building a demilitarized zone right here to start building prepared positions, and there's not going to be much that the Chinese are going to be able to do um, on that. I think that they'll have a hard time at least. Um, so yeah, that'll be interesting to see what happens here. I acknowledge that me choosing this option means we're not going to see some parts of the game pan out the way you would normally expect, but I don't know. Maybe I'll change my mind. We'll see what happens. All right. See you guys in the next one. I'm going to call this a video. We managed to get through 4 turns. We will look at October of 1950 in the next video. It'll be 2 turns for that month before we get into winter turns, which will be a problem for the UN for sure. So thanks for watching, guys. See ya in the next one. Take care. Keep on gaming.